When you look at the world as it's unfolding, unraveling, do you realize that one simple picture can give you an increase in your IQ of 10 to 15 points? For instance, the United States economy over here, $27 trillion. China here at $17 trillion. It is not as big as the U.S., but in this global shaking that is happening, America is becoming very vulnerable. It's politically almost on its knees in terms of an internal collapse with the dollar. China is poised to take over a large part of the global clout because 172 nations are underneath the $1 trillion waterline right there. And what's going to happen as the whole world goes into an economic reset? It's not just the United States, folks. We're in a period of shaking that is unprecedented. It's global shaking. You and I talk as Christians often, as news people, about political or about this, and we micro-focus, but here's the macro message. Today's broadcast is going to cover the big picture because GOAT nations and a global new economic system as an empire system is now beginning to emerge. And the sheep nations, which are historically the sovereign nations with freedom, are beginning to shake. And yet, El Salvador, Argentina, Hungary, Poland, we're watching the rise of a movement that is lurching towards freedom and against the elites. What a fascinating, shaking moment we're in. That's the reason why. Stability, history is what you want to be looking at. These trends are important to observe because they reveal something. We're going to have a guest on who is actually the one who worked with China to integrate them into the world economic system. That's where this model came from. Not just from me, not a prophetic Bible study, but from a global economist. And I want to say this. The stability of the dollar is up in the air. But what is guaranteed throughout the ages is silver and gold. The prophet Haggai said, the gold is mine, the silver is mine. When everything gets shaken, remember that there's some things that historically have retained their stability. That's the reason why I still tell people to go to lancewallnau.com/gold. Before we go into our study today, remember this, the silver's mine, the gold is mine. That's a constant from history. lancewallnau.com/gold. I want you to go there now, read the special report, and take a look at how you can stabilize and protect your retirement account, your money, in a safe haven from the coming shaking. Because I believe that everything that can be shaken will be shaken, but the silver and the gold is mine. That's a biblical premise, and I have confidence some things retain their unshakable characteristics. And I look forward to seeing you on the other side of this board with my guest, Marc Nuttle. Go to lancewallnau.com/gold, and let's get into the broadcast. There are, let's say, decades where nothing happens, and then weeks where decades happen. And we have somebody that's been a specialist on the scene historically, almost like a character out of a science fiction novel. Marc Nuttle has been at the epicenter of historic events more often than anybody I know, and many of you don't know who he is, but we were just discussing during the break this distinguished statesman and economist and theologian and professor's experience representing Boris Yeltsin at the collapse of the Soviet Empire. Nobody saw it coming. It's 1990, 1991. None of the prophets that were prophesied collapse of the Soviet Union. And suddenly, like a deck of cards, boom, 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 they're coming down. Gorbachev is under house arrest. The potential of a nuclear war is about to be launched. We're finding out now how close we came to a nuclear war. They needed a bold lawyer who would represent Boris Yeltsin because Boris Yeltsin had evidently won an election, and he won the election in Russia on the premise that he was going to leave the Soviet Union and govern differently. He gets elected. The whole empire is about to shake. And Marc Nuttle is sent by the United States to go be legal counsel, in part because the lawyers in Russia were nervous that if they think of Stalin, if they represent him and he loses, they could all get killed. You can't make this stuff up, people. Welcome to today's show, the Lance Wallnau Show. We're covering history like you've never heard it, and then we're going to talk about the future like you've never seen it. Marc Nuttle, welcome to the show today.
I'm so glad to be here.
I've got Mercedes Sparks right here, ready to, as our wing woman, ready to roll on the show. So I want to just, have I mischaracterized the experience? So you get the call, you've got to go to Russia. You're going to be representing Boris Yeltsin. He looked like a vodka tipping guy. Was he a real drinker?
He occasionally partook, yes.
He's such a polite man. Marc is, I want you to know, he's not like me. He's a statesman. So I get the impression that he could knock down a few vodkas there. But anyway, history depends on a Reagan. Think of who needed to exist back then. A Margaret Thatcher. The Pope we had back then actually was a courageous, character. And Yeltsin, I mean, think about that. He literally made the decision. He was going to roll. He was going to risk himself being the head of the Russian state in the face of the USSR and challenge it. I mean, what the heck?
Well, and he's running against the Central Committee of the Politburo. They had their candidate. I mean, it was a real election. And they had never had an election where the picked candidate didn't win 98% of the vote. This was a real election. It took great risk.
So he gets so he's getting the votes, and how did he end up on trial? What happens? So what happens next? He wins, and they're going to keep on voting until they get enough votes. It's kind of like what they do in the United States. You just freeze the polls and wait a couple of days till you get enough votes in, and then you retaliate. Is that what they were doing?
Well, it was just one election, but the national press, international press, is following this. To make sure that it just wasn't a sham election. But to show the naivete of the government, they issued a proclamation and circulated it that they were going to continue the elections, the date of the election, until the Soviet-picked candidate got ahead, because Boris Yeltsin was running ahead in the polls. So now it's in limbo. They don't even understand that when they did that the Western press would condemn it. They did, but they also didn't care. So we're in a strategy meeting, and the president was there, and no one knew what to do. And I said, well, it's illegal by the Soviet Constitution. Challenge it. And they all looked like, well, this naive American, like we're going to go to the Supreme Court and they're going to overrule the Central Committee of the Politburo. I said, well, that's, at least you'd expose it. You'd be on record. I said, the public would understand it. I said, you got to have some faith in the public. You got to have faith in people. You're ahead in the polls for a reason, Mr. President. You're ahead because the people have lost confidence. They're not getting the resources they need to run their lives as they see fit. They'll stand with you. Let's go challenge it. Well, then at that point, I mean, I'm not certified to be in front of the Supreme Court. I mean, hadn't been licensed to do that. And the local council is not going to, they're scared to death. They're looking and say, we cannot go before this.
I just want to make sure I'm following your story correctly. You're in Russia right now where this is happening?
I'm in Moscow.
Or you're in the United States? You're in Moscow?
I'm in Moscow. I'm part of the campaign team advising.
Who sent you over there?
Well, the National Endowment for Democracy was the diplomatic cover. There's a gentleman by the name of Paul Weyrich.
Paul Weyrich. Okay, so for those of you guys who don't know the cast of characters, that name was one of the instrumental catalysts behind the introduction of Christians into the political arena. And he saw that something was happening, and out of that came the Pat Robertson candidacy and Ralph Reed, and right now you've got your version of Charlie Kirk. Paul Weyrich was the pioneer, a radio DJ, Catholic in his youth, who comes to Washington, discovers the game is played different than he thought, and starts to cobble together a conservative coalition that set up the game, basically, and guys like Rush Limbaugh activated on the radio, and God used his sovereignty to create a movement. So anyway, but I want to go to this point. You're now in court. Fast forward, Yeltsin is on trial, and you're in the court, and you're helping to advise or defend the president of Russia who is on trial. The lawyers are all scared. And how did God, I think God touched you. How did you end up shaping the history of what happened? I'm saying you shaped the history because they were going to just dismiss you and the state. What you held them to accountability, and media. This is where I thought about the 7 mountains is so important. The government mountain will be corrupt, except when you have the eyes of the public watching. Now you got the media mountain. Now Russia and the Soviet Union's got to be kind of careful because they got a global audience watching. That creates accountability for what they do. Into that orbit, you step up, and what did you do to get them to make the decision?
Well, I'm making a traditional presentation by petition why it was illegal, their proclamation was illegal, and that there are constitutional rights for individuals and people running for office in the Soviet Union. This was for the presidency of the Republic of Russia, which is a component of the USSR. And I'm getting nowhere. I mean, they're not even paying attention. You can just see the body language. They're just dismissing everything I said.
And worse yet, you're an American.
And worse than that, I'm not even. I'm a U.S. citizen. And I'm about to come to closing argument, and I realized that they're going to take it under advisement and rule against us, or not rule, whatever they do, and delay the election. And I just felt, I'll be honest with you, I felt this from the Holy Spirit. I said, say this, and I just said it. I just quoted due process, constitutional rights, regardless of race, creed, color, or sex, the decency of democracy and the people's rights to have a vote and an uninterrupted choice. And the Chief Justice, who spoke English, I can close my eyes and see him right now. He leaned over the bench and leaned down at me and said, "How dare you, as an American, come in here and lecture constitutional law to us? How dare you quote the United States Constitution as if we're supposed to follow that? We know how to provide righteousness and democracy in this country, and we have our way of doing it, and how dare you?" And I said, "Mr. Chief Justice, I'm quoting from your Constitution." And you could have heard a pin drop, and I pulled it. I pulled it out and gave him rhyme and verse. But Lance, what happened was you couldn't have predicted it. There's 9 justices. Every one of them sat back in their chairs. You could say, "Huh, he's right." I mean, they rethought the whole thing and all of my arguments.
Oh, hallelujah!
And then they're respectful, and they're treating me like an officer of the court and asking.
I just got to say something now. You folks out there that pray, all those 700 Club prayers when I was young with Pat Robertson. Lord, we pray for the Soviet Union, for your freedom. We pray that communism will fall and that the people will have an opportunity to hear the gospel. And we'd pray those prayers, and we were idealistically maybe not sophisticated, but we knew we were praying for God to tear down that wall and open up freedom so that the gospel of Jesus could go into those places. It's your prayers that activate moments in history. When you get to heaven, you'll find this out. I'm giving you a little preview of what you're going to find out. God will put a guy like Marc Nuttle down there, and he'll be in the middle of this court, and God will give him a word of wisdom. Quote their Constitution, but don't tell them it's their Constitution. And then, boom, they start rebuking him, and then they find out this is your Constitution. Now, typically, they would have to convene. All right, we're going to end the session right here, boom, boom, and go back and call the Politburo and get some advice. What do you want us to do? We got a problem here. We got a da-da-da-da. Well, you tell them you're going to delay your decision. But somehow God used you to keep them from even doing that. So what happened next in the drama of history?
Well, they're actually acting like proper jurists now. And I think, again, the Chief Justice didn't understand the next statement that he made, just like the Central Committee didn't understand the proclamation of continuing the elections till they got ahead, that would be acceptable. He looked at me and he said, "Mr. Nuttle, we will take this under advisement with our superiors and get back to you as soon as we can." And they adjourned the court. And they all stood up, start to walk out. And again, Lance, I can't tell you why I did it. I took my hand and I hit the table as hard as I could, just like that. And, of course, they jumped and they turned around. And I said, "I call this court back in session." Well, now you think about that. I can't call the court back in session. I mean, that's the Chief Justice's job. But anyway, they did. They came back. They sat down. And then I reminded them that they were the superior Supreme Court. They have no superiors. There is nobody else they can talk to but themselves under advisement. There's a doctrine called ex parte communication, meaning you can't communicate your decision to a third party that's not a member of this proceeding without me as counsel being there. And I gave them all that civil procedure and jurisprudence, and they listened. And then the Chief Justice looked at me and nodded and said, "Okay." That's all he said. I get it. And then adjourned and got up and walked out. 48 hours later, they ruled in our favor. And I think it's the only time the Supreme Court ever overruled the Central Committee.
The Supreme Court of
Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union.
Now, but to your question about history, okay, so now fast forward. Ukraine declares independence in August of that same year. In September.
You're talking about like 1991, 1992.
And no, 91. It all happened in
all happened in 91. Whoa.
Okay. Now we're in September, October running these elections. October was the election day. Nobody saw the fall of the Soviet Union coming. No one knew how bad it was economically for them. No one, Lance, not any of our national security people, no one around the world that I know of. Anyway, we're in the middle of the election. The hardliners in the Soviet Union advised Gorbachev that if we don't destroy the United States, they can't survive, they can't win economically in the world, and they were going to collapse. Gorbachev resists the advice. They actually, we didn't know it's for 10 years later until all the documents came.
But they advised him to do what? To stop America winning?
Yes.
What did they advise?
Nuclear war.
Nuclear war. I want to point out again, if people have missed it. Nuclear
war.
Gorbachev was being advised, provoke, go for it. Drop the nukes on the United States. And you didn't know in 1991. I mean, what was going on in America? Like, Saving Private Ryan was a movie. I don't know what was coming out. We were all like doing our life. We had no idea how close we came.
But let me connect some dots. Further, they made the decision on the premise that the Soviet Union had more critical assets hardened underground than the United States, that 1 to 200 million people would die in the war on both sides, but they would come out stronger because we'd be incapable of running a country after that, and they could still run a country, and they'd take over the world.
There are people that actually are willing to do that.
That was their in-writing advice. That was what they advised him to do. And when he rejected it, there was a military coup. Gorbachev was exiled to Crimea. Well, he actually was in Crimea, and they put him under house arrest so he couldn't get back to Moscow. We're in Ukraine running these elections going, what's going on? I'm reporting to the attaché, where there was no embassies in Kiev. It was the Ukraine. It wasn't a country yet. I'm reporting directly to the attaché for the United States State Department in Moscow, and he doesn't know. The President of the United States doesn't know for sure what's going on. That's how fragile it was in the world. But the reason the coup failed is because Boris Yeltsin wouldn't go along with it. And he ordered the military units of the Russian Republic to stand down, and of course that was the key force of the Soviet army. And when Boris Yeltsin failed to support the coup failed. Those hardliners were put in jail. Gorbachev was released. He was there for 3 weeks. This went on for 3 full weeks.
Brother.
There were bullets fired. I mean, there were tanks fired at each other. Mini civil war in Moscow. But because Boris Yeltsin was elected, so now go back to that point where God changed those Supreme Court justices' hearts, and they ruled against their own. They stood on what was the Constitution that they'd been trained as jurists to do, and finally did it. Boris Yeltsin gets elected, and barely less than 6 months later, because of him being president, the coup fails. The elections go on. Ukraine wins independence, and on December 10th of that year, the Soviet Union formally dissolved. That quick. And nobody in September, October, no one saw it coming in December. Now, when we get to China, I know a bold proclamation, but having worked in China since 1991 and having known Deng Xiaoping personally and what his plan was, I believe that China is the same place today at the same point in year of the summer of 2024 that the Soviet Union was in the summer.
All right, folks, I want you to catch this, because I don't want the monotone nature of our conversation to miss the bold underscore. What happened in 1991 with the fall of the Soviet Union was not seen. It wasn't fully anticipated. Nobody was writing this into the platform for the Republican Party. It was history happening and overtaking us. Marc Nuttle, who had a front row seat to that whole experience, as an economist now, is saying China is about to enter its Soviet Union moment. But it might not be a collapse, but it's caught in the vice grips of a global economic reset. And China is not as strong and stable as many of you think it is. So we're going to go to the board and make a trip over there. And we got like 10 minutes on the clock. It's going to be a big challenge, Mark, but loving the conversation, but we're going to have to take a quick break. We'll be right back. I want to take a moment to talk about the volatile financial time that we're in. And I want you to empower yourself with knowledge. My people perish for lack of knowledge, the Bible says. Visit lancewallnau.com/birch and get a free information kit. Consider discussing how to shift your 401k or your retirement account into a tax-sheltered gold and silver account. Why don't you go to lancewallnau.com/birch right now and take action for a secure future. Why don't you go over there now and get ready to go, because we're gonna analyze where is China and the United States, because I don't think unless you see a picture, you get it. I could talk numbers and people's eyes just roll back in the back of their head. $1 trillion of additional debt every 100 days in the United States. Well, people don't know how to relate it. But what if you were to see a graph that Mark could give you just on the board there of where's the GDP or the economy of the United States on a curve, a continuum, like a U, like a valley of decision. Where's China? The opposite system, communism versus democracy. And where's the other countries in relationship to this?
Let me set the stage for what we're going to talk about right now. What is bringing this to a head is world debt. Every country in the world, with the possible exception of Switzerland, is in debt over 100% of their GDP, their gross domestic product. If there's anything that Milton Friedman taught me, and I believe in my heart of hearts, is you cannot print and borrow money forever as a country. At some point, you have to balance your budget. If you didn't have to do that, and all you had to do was print money, then you wouldn't need God or any other principles. You just have government throwing out money, and if something didn't happen right, then you just throw that away and start over again. It's kind of how China does it, by the way. But the world is in a situation now where a reset is inevitable. It's because governments continue to deficit spend. They're taking a higher percent of the liquidity of the world to deficit spend for policy programs, and at the same time for the interest on the debt, that the numbers are going to cross in somewhere in 2025. And this isn't philosophical discussion. These are economic, mathematical equations that are as immutable as gravity, as a natural law. They're unemotional. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're coming from politically. There are limits to what you can do in print and borrow money. And so China's there. Just real quick, when I was helping them set up the Shanghai Stock Exchange in 1991 through about 1993, I argued with Deng Xiaoping at that time that if he set his Federal Reserve up where the money they spent wasn't accountable, and they just kind of pushed it away and didn't know how much money was in. They didn't think that once a project failed, that money was still out there in circulation. Well, there were builders and contractors, and cement was poured, and that was all in the system. No one today knows what their currency is really worth, the yuan. But I argued with him then that if he did that his exchange rate would never be tradable on a free-floating exchange rate with Western currencies. And he countered by saying it doesn't matter because then 1.2 billion people will do whatever I tell them to do. This is Deng Xiaoping. They'll buy what I tell them to buy. They'll say what I tell them to say. They'll spend when I tell them to spend. They'll do whatever I tell them. And that's the difference between Chinese capitalism and Western capitalism. And all of this is about, ladies and gentlemen, we get to spiritually what this means, is that totalitarianism and communism eliminates your free choice in economics, which at the same time eliminates your ability to direct your family's morality the way you see fit. And that is non-biblical. In other words, the reason that all communist countries outlaw God is because they can't have him in the equation telling you what your relationship should be directly with God. And that's where this spiritually comes down. But let's chart something here so we understand what we're dealing with. I like to chart it like this, where there's a trough. Now, what a lot of people don't understand is that this is the United States of America, and its economy right now is somewhere around $27 trillion. And when you look at this, this is a world curve. When you see when I do it, you're going to see how this works. But where do you think China is on this? I mean, they would tell you that they're equal to us, that they've got the same power that we do in every other way, but they're not. They're down here about $10 trillion less than we are, somewhere around currently 17 trillion. And this is China. Now, when I told Deng Xiaoping that his currency would never be tradable, no matter what their economic strength was, and he told me what he would do with the population, that I said, well, he offered. I didn't, and I wish I'd asked him then why he said this, but he said it will take 30 years to decide which one of us is right. I've since learned from some of my Chinese counterparts that that's a generational philosophical analysis of principles in China. But anyway, 30 years ran last year. And if he was still alive today, I'd say, Mr. Chairman, if in fact you are a $17 trillion economy at this point of equation with us, why is it that nobody wants your currency, including yourself? They fight for dollars like everybody else. The yuan, the dollar is the world's currency, and the yuan is not even tradable in Hong Kong, free floating. Now, to show you the disparity, though, of these two entities in these times of economic conflict of who's going to win the world system, what is the next largest economy in the world other than China? It's Japan, and they're this far down here at about 3 trillion. And I chart that, then after that's Germany, UK, France, the G7, Italy, the G7. But look at the difference between the US economy and the next largest Western economy. And the US is basically larger than the entire G7 collectively. Now, on a line, there is no other communist country. There's Cuba, North Korea, but I mean, they're insignificant. And so it's just them. And I do another chart where this is down here like this. There are 18, when you look at economies like this to see this disparity, the size of the United States, besides the world's currency and the other things that we dominate, how important we are to the world. But right now we're deficit spending and abusing our currency. We deficit spend about $2.3 trillion a year on a $6.8 trillion budget. I can put that over here for you want to. 6.8 and 2.3, and we're on an income of about 4.5 trillion. This 2.3 trillion is 25% of our budget, but it's 5% of the world's money supply on any given day. World money supply. If you can read this. So what are we doing to our partners who have to get into dollars to buy oil or wheat or pharmaceuticals or anything else? The transaction cost between a local currency and then getting into the dollars for their strategic purposes and then back into their currency cost anywhere from 7 to 8%. And we're killing them, and we're not good managers of our currency because of this. And we're not good stewards, period. Now, there are only 18 countries with over $1 trillion in GDP in the world. And there are 193 countries recognized by the UN in the world today, okay? So the number of countries that on this line down here that is less than 1 trillion is about 172 countries. And then what I chart, and what Lance likes to chart, or likes me to talk, is that when you do this, and you take all these countries that are down here below $1 trillion, they can't possibly get through this next reset and recalibrate their currencies because they're not strong enough regionally to be able to do it. And so these mathematical equations that are coming to bear, that we've known for decades were going to happen, and yet we continue to deficit spend. And so what maybe we can put my other charts up, but the only way China can survive, and I made that comment about China's at the same point in the summer of 24 that the Soviet Union was in 91. The hardliners of China know they can't win. And one of the things Deng Xiaoping told me was that when they started spending gold for strategic purchases, that he would shut down the region, maybe like a bamboo curtain, and double down on a Soviet Union type closed economy, because he would not spend gold and then therefore spend into oblivion their resources. And that's where they are right now. But what they realize is they can't beat this system. Now, why can't they beat this system? It's not because we're better. It's not because we're privileged. It's because we are a country that believes that God is sovereign, the family is sovereign, that a husband and wife are responsible for their own families. They don't turn to the government for that, and it's okay to worship a God other than government. And because of that, we have free choice. And because we have free choice, we're in line with the societal order and structure of how God meant it to be. And it doesn't fit this, where they short-circuit your ability. Under communism and totalitarianism, they short-circuit your ability to make choices for yourself because only the state matters and the state makes the decision. So now what they're trying to do is shed a shadow, if you will, over these 172 countries and saying to them, all right, your currencies won't work. You're not going to make it. So now what are you going to choose? You're going to choose freedom in the United States, who's not doing anything particularly for you because they're continuing to deficit spend, or come to us where we set the prices. Everything is dictated from the top down in a command economy, and we promise you you'll like it, but you'll have no freedom, no control over your own destiny, no pursuit of happiness, only for the good of government, and that's the decision that's coming.
All right, so Mark, that sounds ominously close to what Klaus Schwab said, which says you're going to own nothing, but you'll be happy. What I'm confused on is, so I want to make sure, because he's as the economist and professor, obviously this might go over the head of somebody who's, I'm trying to figure out the grocery bill last week. I was shopping. But you got $27 trillion economy here with the U.S., 17 trillion here with China. So we're not on parity competing like that. And if you really go under the surface, what Mark said is, nobody trusts their economics because they have no accountability. They're throwing out numbers like, we have 7% GDP. Well, then you look at the real estate market collapse in China. You look at how vulnerable they are. They may not be able to they may be more fragile than we think. But then we're overspending like drunken sailors. This is what's maddening. With much knowledge comes much grief. You know that the United States, if it could handle its own discipline, its stupid lust for spending and its preoccupation with giving away goodies to its people, if we had restraint, this system would actually fall down. And the United States, why do you think if Trump not being in office it created war in the Ukraine and a Hamas attack in Israel? And think of how the world would be different. We don't have time to go there right now, but we got one election cycle to try to fix this. The underwater mark here is there's 172 nations that in a shaking, I'm going to shake everything that can be shaken, the Bible says. So let's assume that we have a shaking that's going to happen. And we have this global kind of crack up. These countries here are not going to be able to sustain themselves. Will the United States be able to make an argument that there is a system which allows you freedom, like El Salvador wants to have, like Argentina wants to have? These are what I call the sheep nations, by the way, sovereign nations. Or are they going to go into the goat system of empire, which, by the way, is the beast of the book of Revelations? We're coming into this versus this, but I want you to see how the economics ties in so that what are the likely scenarios here? Mark, you say, okay, China's going to say, hey, come over here with us. We've got a stable system. What's the United States going to offer? What could a Trump presidency offer?
Well, first, what they're going to offer, which is a lie, is a stable universal currency. and maybe a digitized yuan that they'll underwrite. But it's all by price controls and dictation. It doesn't work. That's why they're in trouble today. Communism doesn't work. Why? Because the diversity of decision-making process and the diversity of humankind is a God-given axiom. That's what he likes. That we all make our own decisions for ourselves with him in charge. Okay, now what could the United States do? If we were to balance the budget, now we don't have to do it in 1 year. This is 25.
But if we were to show that we have the will to restrict, because we control the economy right now. If we could demonstrate, we will allow, so let's say things all shake down. Donald Trump comes in and goes, no, I'm not going to go to socialism to solve the problem. I'm going to make sure our people are fed. I'm going to maintain order on the streets. But you states are going to have to sort this out. You got yourself in this thing, start to figure out how to get it out. Will that provide, if we can start to bring this spending under control, will that affect this? It's a big Milton Friedman question. Will that affect the 172 other nations that are saying, well, what are we going to do?
Well, a couple of things. I don't believe Congress is going to balance the budget. And so, and when I say they don't have to do it 1 year, maybe over 4 years, but your point's well taken. Just stop the spending where it is and slowly show that we have the will to do it. The dollar would become stronger than gold. The flow of the economy would come to this central source because those who have capital and want to protect it would come to our safe harbor. And this would fail just like it did in the Soviet Union when they couldn't figure out a way around it. Now, what's going to happen in the next 18 months, Lance, is that by economic mathematics, these numbers are going to have to be adjusted. In other words, countries around the world are not going to be able to continue to deficit spend and borrow money. We're critically getting to the point where governments are borrowing so much money of the world's liquidity right now, there's nobody to buy it. And when that happens, you've only got two options. You can print it and go into hyperinflation, or there'll be a recalibration of debt. Banks will be in trouble. There'll be restriction of capital. Well, we've been through this before. We've had a world depression before World War II. And this isn't anything that we can't solve. But this time it's worse because of an integrated world economy. It affects everybody. Where prior to World War II,
a global reset.
Yeah, it's a global reset. And when that happens, okay, now I think I made this point.
All right, we got 1 minute, though. We have to summarize this.
Okay, well, first,
we could do something else.
Remember this. There's another reason why the United States is exceptional. We're the only country in the world that allows local authority to the extent that we do. With how we run our schools, our bond issues, our infrastructure of our streets and cities, our hospitals, we're the only country like that. Now, there are others, UK and others, that have some freedom, but primarily it comes from a federal budget. And when the United States was founded and we moved west, we did it with local authority and cities managing their own future. That's going to come again, and it's going to be an opportunity for the body of Christ to step into communities by forming community economic alliances with small family-owned businesses, running their own affairs as they see fit. And the federal government will come to us for the answer by 2026 if we'll just have the discipline to believe what God tells us is the proper order for society.
So let me summarize in a picture what Marc is saying. He's basically saying, stuff's impossible to erase sometimes. He's saying, look, what you've got with the communist-style government is so big and in control, the individual has very little choice in what they can do. So when the government fails, it's local chaos. You get the food shelves, like the whole Soviet Union thing is you lie about it. Nothing's on the shelf, but everybody says they're fine because they're afraid of complaining. In the United States, you see that, the all-seeing eye. It's the local. The government is supposed to have limited control. The states are supposed to have all the rights that aren't enumerated. This is Article 10. Anything that isn't specifically given to the government, the states can do. And that gives the individual states a lot of latitude. Your point is that in the systemic breakdown of things, the totalitarian system, which is ruled by a king or autocrat or a government, has very little local initiative, innovation, and flexibility. Whereas our system, when this little crown starts to come down and the government can't handle it, innovation and local jurisdictions, states and communities come alive with, we're going to take care of Fort Worth this way. We're going to do this. And the engine of democracy suddenly starts to catalyze because it goes down to the local level. It's something that God himself biblically has, elders in cities and towns, as opposed to empires. So that's where we're going to go. Our next broadcast, Mark, here, we're going to do a shorter one for the next one, but I want to cover this. We're in a battle between the emerging empire system, beast system of global governance versus the freedom of the individual, but Americans have become soft. We like security more than we like freedom. Innovation. We'd rather have the government solve the problem than individuals. So when we come back, we're going to talk for a moment about what's needed to exist in order to handle this inevitable shaking, and what's the mindset and what's the strategy for you as a local community to be able to handle what's coming. I call it the Malta scenario. It's a biblical scenario where things break up and an innovative moment happens. And if the church is ready, it could be your finest hour. We're going to come back with our next broadcast and finish this series with what is a solution for you in your community, your church, for the global shaking that's inevitable. Thank you. What happens if a natural disaster takes place? We have these weird tornadoes that hit in the Midwest and in Texas, but look at the hurricanes in Florida. People can literally have their houses flooded, or they're in a situation where they have no food or access to groceries. Everyone needs at least a 4-week emergency food kit. And fortunately, My Patriot Supply has created a 4-week emergency kit. And these products will last for 25 years. The interesting thing is they give you a 2,000 calorie per day meal. And that's the key. Delicious and 2,000 calories a day, because that's what you're going to need to sustain yourself for 4 weeks in a crisis. We had a winter freeze here in Texas, of all places. And we had a couple of days where we had no electricity. I'm telling you something, this makes a huge difference. Mushroom rice pilaf, fluffy rice and mushrooms, seasoned with red wine and herb. And then how about starting the day off? Maple Grove oatmeal, old-fashioned oats, maple flavoring with a pinch of brown sugar. This is what you want to do. 4-week emergency food kit, and that's just for you. Think about your children. Guarantee somebody around you is going to need help. You're going to want to at least have the 4-week emergency kit. Go to lancewallnau.com/patriot. Use that link, and you're going to get a special discount on their special 4-week emergency kit promotion.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends, because the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are.